Good evening, everybody, and welcome. This is the Vermont Yankee Nuclear Decommissioning Citizens Advisory Panel. We'll start this meeting at 6:04 p.m. We will first just start off with some general instructions for the webcast. I should introduce myself too. My name is Emily Davis, this year's chair of the panel. We're still waiting for a few panelists to join, but in the meantime, just a few housekeeping items. Do mute yourself when you come in. And I also, if you get muted, it might be one of us presenters that are muting you. We'll mute people. And if you like to speak, just come off mute. Thank you, Tony. If you'd like to speak, you can raise your hand, and I'm monitoring the participant list so I can see that you've raised your hand and you'd like to speak. And you can also write questions in the chat, and occasionally I'll throw some links into the chat too of the presentations that are being up by state agencies. Yes, unless it's public comment, meeting attendees are in the listen-only mode just so that we can get through our business. I see someone's waiting in the lobby. So, any other opening remarks? Any amendments to the agenda before we go in while we wait for, actually, no, I'll wait until all the panelists get in. We'll start with introductions first. Is someone on the phone? I see that number.
Yeah, sorry about that, Emily. Bob Leach just called in. I think he's having trouble joining the meeting, so I'm going to drop offline to try to.
Okay. I don't know who's on the phone, but I'm going to mute them while Tony's fixing that. In the meantime, we'll just start with introduction. So I'll just do a quick attendance and run through. I'll call your name, and then if you could introduce yourself for the meeting attendees. We'll start right at the top of our list with Madeline Arms. Maddie, are you here?
Yes, Madeline Arms, Town of Vernon.
Hi, Maddie. Chris Campany can't join us this evening. Sarah Coffey.
Hi, I'm Sarah Coffey. I'm a citizen appointee by the Speaker of the House, and I'm also the state rep for Guilford and Vernon.
Okay. Corey Daniels.
Good evening, I'm Corey Daniels. I'm the NorthStar Vermont Yankee Company representative.
Myself, Emily Davis. Bill Irwin, are you here?
Yes, Emily, I am. Bill Irwin. I represent the Vermont Agency of Human Services. I work for the Vermont Department of Health as the Radiological and Toxicological Sciences Program Chief.
Hi, Bill. Bob Leach, are you on the line? Was that you calling in? I'll give Bob Leach another minute. Brett Long? No, Brett. Mark McDonald? No, Senator McDonald. Paul Mark, which is a Massachusetts representative, I believe is not here either. David Pearson?
Good evening, David Pearson, NorthStar representative.
Hi, David. Marvin Resnikoff? I see you, Marvin, but you're still muted. I don't know if you're trying to speak, Marvin, but you're muted. Oh, I wish I could unmute you. There's, if you look, I don't know what your window looks like, but, oh, there you are.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you now.
It's Marvin Resnikoff still.
Okay. Trish Coppolino.
Hi, I'm Trish Copolino with representative for the Agency of Natural Resources, and I am the program manager for the Contaminated Sites Program in Waste Management Division.
Right. And our newest representative, welcome. It's nice to have you here formally. Laura Sibilia.
Okie dokie. Thank you.
Apologies. My husband just brought me a bite to eat before the meeting. Laura Sibilia, House Energy and Technology Committee.
Hi, Laura. June Tierney.
Good evening, Commissioner Tierney from the Department of Public Service, and I've already had my dinner.
Josh Unruh, who's our panel vice chair, but I believe he's not able to make it this evening. And Lissa Weinman. Lissa, are you here? No, Lissa.
I have no indication that Lissa is on, and earlier discussion with Marvin indicated that she may be on vacation this week. Bob Leach has joined as well, so
Bob Leach has joined. So let's just see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
That gets us to quorum.
10, 11. That gets us to quorum. All right, we've made quorum in the middle of vacation, summer vacation season. So welcome everybody. That's great. So we'll just dive right in. Any panelists, you have the agenda in front of you, or you should. Any amendments to the agenda before we get started? No. I do have, Tony and I were speaking about it just a little bit before the meeting. I do, at some point, maybe after our policy committee discussion, or instead of if Lissa isn't here to lead that discussion, just quickly discuss the governor's announcement today that we have reached 80% vaccination rate, which means that some of the COVID restrictions, all of the COVID restrictions will be lifted, and just open the door of that conversation and see what that might mean for future NDCAP meetings. So I don't think that that's going to take a long time because there's not a whole lot that we know right now, but we should start to have the conversation as a panel of how we want to meet in the future. Any other amendments? Okay.
I don't know if you need an amendment, but I really would like to have present meetings rather than these Zoom meetings. This is Bob Leach.
Hi, Bob. Noted. I'll be curious to see what the other panel members think when we get to that.
Okay.
The agenda. Tony, do we need to have a vote on the agenda if we change it?
That's a good question. I mean, this is just a very brief amendment to the meeting. I would just say if any, I'd ask if there's any objections.
It's not.
And leave it at that.
Any objections to discussing the format of future meetings?
I have no objection to adding that.
Okay.
To our agenda tonight. This is Sarah.
Thank you, Sarah. Okay.
Same here. No objection.
Same. No objection.
Great. That's all I need.
Bob here, no objections.
Wonderful. So then let's move on to the review and approval of the April 12th, 2021 meeting minutes.
Emily, this is Sarah. I'm sorry to interrupt you. Is it possible, could we take down the agenda so that we could see each other? It might be helpful.
Certainly.
Yeah, I put that up since we were talking about the agenda, but it should be gone now.
Thank you, Tony. And thank you for the suggestions, Sarah. Nice to see all of your beautiful faces. Okay, so meeting minutes. Any proposed changes?
Yes, I took, this is Tony Leshinskie speaking again. I did take a quick run through the minutes this afternoon, and I noticed several small changes that I would like to make on page 5 and one change on page 6. So if you'll bear with me, I'll just describe these. These are very minor changes. In line 11 on page 5, near the end of the line where it currently says, "Where to thee," it should actually say, "Where do thee," because the sentence is, "Where do the funds from the sale go?" And in line number 14, the third word is cited, S-I-T-E-D. It should actually be cited, beginning with a C rather than an S. And then moving down to line 24, we need a space between A and 145 kilowatt generator. And then moving down to line 31 on that same page, reading across, there's the statement, "He did note that NorthStar knows who some of the more significant items," where is actually more appropriate rather than who in that line. And those are all the items on page 5. Page 6 just has one minor correction. Line 43, near the second to last line at the bottom of the page, the word license should be licensed, ending with a D. And those are the only changes that I found looking through the minutes. I don't know, did anyone else find any other changes or has further questions on those changes?
I propose accepting all of Tony's editorial changes as described.
Bob Leach, your second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Anyone opposed? And any abstentions? Okay, great. Motion passes unanimously. Wonderful. So at this point, then, we'll just move right along to the NorthStar update on VY site decommissioning activities. So Corey, I believe this is you.
Thanks, Emily. Tony, if you want to just toggle through the slide deck for me, please. Whenever you're ready.
It should be up there in a moment. There we go. Okay, do people see that right now?
No.
Oh, okay. Bear with me for a further second.
Nothing yet.
Good job, Tony.
Okay, there we go. I keep making these buttons smaller. Sometimes I
Got it.
All right, next slide, please. So this should be familiar to folks who've been to one of these presentations before. We start all of our slideshows with the same message. The decommissioning process in its essential aggregate is about doing it safely and doing it correctly. We have what we call Target Zero, trying to avoid all accidents, every type of safety constituent that we can, including radiological, environmental, industrial, and nuclear. It's our goal to get through this decommissioning without anybody getting hurt, having a lost time motion recordable incident, or in any way placing the public, the environment, or any members of our team in harm. Next slide, please. So safety remains acceptable. I would believe by most standards, this would get a higher grade, but we try to reserve a degree of humility when we talk about safety, because you're only good as your last report. So we are now over 750,000 work hours on site since NorthStar acquired the Vermont Yankee facility, and have had no lost time accidents. That number continues to go up, and we look forward to cresting 1 million and beyond. Similarly, our regulatory performance remains good. We've had no cited or non-cited violations for all of 2019, 2020, and so far of 2021. We recently just did an exhaustive QA audit to take a close look at all our regulatory requirements ourselves. We've had a few small areas that we believe we can make some improvements and ensure that we continue to manage in the proper way to meet our regulatory targets. Overall, our production remains acceptable. The project is scheduled to finish on track. The reactor bulk removal is still behind where we'd like it to be, but it remains not a significant impact. You'll see when we go through the slides of the reactor progress, it continues safely and competently, and the work they're doing is excellent. Overall, we continue to look for targets of opportunity to bring up the rest of the site decommissioning efforts, and we'll be able to show you some photos of some of those areas that we're working on. Next slide, please. So this is a macro of the overall project schedule. It remains the same as it has been shown in previous presentations. The spent fuel management component of it will continue until the Department of Energy meets its obligation to remove the spent nuclear fuel, or another solution, potentially through legislative activities and federal efforts, and provides the ability to remove the fuel from the Vernon site. The site restoration and final status surveys, those efforts have begun in earnest, determining what stays, what goes, how we'll survey it, all the things throughout the history of the site that have occurred that we'll have to manage and ensure that we document properly, that all the things that should be cleaned up or gone from the site are being done. The large component removal is ongoing. You'll see some photos of that. The decontamination and demolition of all the ancillaries, including piping and floor drain systems and roofing materials and all that universal waste and the asbestos abatement and epoxy coatings in the floors and every other thing that has to come out of the structures with the proper sampling and oversight is being done. Next slide, please. So, big component of the project, and once this is out of the way, we can really get to work on the reactor building itself. Primarily because the reactor building crane is so integral and important to all of the movement of materials for decommissioning activities, and it is highly spoken for the vessel segmentation work right now. But you can see we continue to make good progress, and if you look across the bottom, now that we have the shroud cylinder done, we are now working on some of the large bolting and clamping components that held the shroud together. Once that's finished, we'll be able to go after the jet pump assemblies. Once that's done, when we're already inside the reactor containment area, measuring and prepping the setup and equipment so we can drain the reactor vessel down and start cutting all the piping and nozzles and penetrations off the sides of the reactor. Then we'll be able to basically slice the reactor vessel into segments, or wedding bands as we call them, vertically coming down. Just to remember that reactor is about 22 feet wide, about 57 feet tall. But the work gets easier. Next slide, please. So these are some photos of recent activities up on the refuel floor in the dryer separator pit and into a storage rack, placing the last pieces of the shroud as it's been segmented in preparation for shipment, packaging and shipment in a custom box to Texas. Get an idea for the scale. You see how big those pieces are. And you also notice the water clarity is a little degraded. The cutting operations and the garnet that we use in our high pressure water jet system, when it's in operation, does tend to cloud up the working volumes. But we have systems in place to clean that as we go, and we're working on that as well as we continue the work. Next slide, please. So a little more scale to the work that's going on. In the foreground, you can actually see one of those collection barrels of the filtration system I was describing to help clean up the garnet and maintain the pool water clarity. The pool water chemistry remains fine, and the activities and the ability to do the cuts has not been impeded significantly, as once they're started, it's all done with a guided system that does it automatically once we put it in the right place and begin the cut. You can see the level of effort with the additional folks when they're moving even something as small as the spent fuel filters into a basket underwater. Next slide, please. So elsewhere, out of the reactor building, the rest of the turbine building is pretty much fair game, with the exception of the fire protection system and some of the electrical equipment. We're basically going after all the remaining equipment in the turbine building that we possibly can. We moved all the people out of the administrative structure that is attached on the very north end of the turbine building near the control room. That is being prepped for demolition as well. And all the ventilation system and equipment has been replaced with temporary equipment, and all this gear has come out already. I know I keep showing you pictures of empty rooms, but if you ever saw these rooms before they're even halfway empty, you'd have a good idea just how much work goes into removing all this gear. Next slide, please. Additionally, some of the remaining large bore steam piping that used to go to the advanced off gas building from the main condenser are steam jet air ejectors. This has all been removed and cleaned out and shipped to Texas. Next slide, please. So some of the very large components, these moisture separators weigh about 114 tons each. They're suspended from the ceiling with large 2-inch threaded rods. The plan was sort of built around them. So the demolition process for these includes dismantlement and removal of the components in smaller pieces. This is the inside of the steam system. It's very low contamination levels, and we're able to manage this work very easily. And I continue to be impressed with the long-standing good operation practices of the plant over 44 years, resulting in a very easy to clean up boiling water reactor parts. Next slide, please. So again, a little bit of an idea for scope and size. These are the main condenser tube bundles. The main condenser is kind of in 4 parts, 2 large tube bundles on each side. To the right of that photo is an identical photo, but those huge tube bundles have already been mostly removed. You can see right through the main condenser into the rest of the heater bay area in the turbine building. Next slide. So additionally, a little deeper into the turbine building, some of the water systems that we used to polish the water prior to it going to the reactor were the condensate demineralizers. The block walls have been removed, and these large vessels, which had been empty since 2014, 2015, have also been removed and pulled out and loaded into rail cars and shipped to Texas, allowing the building structure to be accessible to remove the internal and wall piping, and then ultimately to remove all of the concrete and rebar and block walls themselves. Next slide, please. So again, in the few places where vintage to the Vermont Yankee construction, we had materials that required removal, such as the epoxy floor coating in the turbine building, especially in the 232 and 222 foot elevations. Those floors have been scabbled up and removed and sampled, and that's all part of the process for ensuring all the contaminants get out of the structure before we do the major demolition. Same thing goes for insulation on wires for PCB if we find any, and other contaminants as the decommissioning continues. Next slide, please. So outside, a large storage tank, 500,000 gallon condensate storage tank. The bottom right picture is actually an interior photo of that tank. You can see the piping and sections that used to go to all the emergency systems will all be clipped off. All the inside of that tank will be coated with a fixative just to prevent any mild loose contamination from escaping, and then that will be chopped up and shipped away in rail cars as well. You can see on the top photo on the person lift there, the gentleman cutting a doorway in, and then the large photo on the right, you can see negative high efficiency particulate air filter system off to the right, and then the controlled potentially contaminated area to allow the access for workers inside the tank. And the same work is happening with a couple of the other exterior water tanks. Next slide, please, Tony. So additionally, the power that used to leave right from the main transformer after the turbine spun the generator generated electricity, that 108-foot tower in the 345,000 volt lines that went to the main switch yard have now been removed. We toppled that in the parking lot. I had a little video of it, but it's kind of loud and boring and it just falls over. So I'll spare you guys that one. Maybe we'll get it in one of the next presentations. I could sneak it by the screeners. Next slide, please. So it gives you an idea of some of the parts and components that come out of the main condenser. Those are butterfly valves that used to service some of the large condensate systems. Again, those fixes have applied to them, and those will just get loaded into rail cars and shipped directly to Texas for very local waste. Next slide. So I know I've showed you a few cars being loaded over the presentations, but we continue to load out 2 to 4 rail cars a week. And you can see a super sack being loaded down into one of the rail cars in the German loading bay in this photo. Next slide, please. And again, as mentioned, we continue with our shipping pace. That picked up a little bit with the nicer weather. Although I'll say today, I don't think the weather was all that great. But we shipped more than that now today. I think we're over 60 now today. And we're continuing on pace to complete the decommissioning from a material removal standpoint with no challenges. Next slide, please. As far as the non-radiological site characterization or remediation, we continue to work and have a bi-weekly call with the various agencies. We just had one at 3 o'clock this afternoon. We continue to work through the post-demolition survey and sampling plan, which has been approved. We have all that framework in place to do underneath of the sampling of building slabs to get soils and pipe trenches once they're exposed. One of the things about the way we're building the plan out for this, it allows us to do the work at the right time with the right group of people to make us more efficient and ensure that everything is rapidly identified and managed with the resource allocation necessary as soon as possible. We do have 3 corrective action plans that have been through the public notice process. They're already approved. We refer to those as small dig and hauls, so very small contaminant locations where we'll basically just remove soil, test the margins, replace with the correct materials. And you can see that's near the south warehouse, the fuel storage tanks, and by the transformers. So 2 additional ones are submitted and in review right now. Next slide, go ahead, Tony, get right on track. So a reminder, we have a risk evaluation that's been under review for some time with A&R. Obviously with COVID, some slowdowns have occurred, but they're giving us the help we need. We have no new areas of impact identified, and we have determined that we will not need remediation at a number of the areas of concern, which is consistent with our expectations, although we conservatively looked for materials and items that we might have to remediate everywhere possible on site. The annual groundwater report was completed. We continue to sample with some reductions to the numbers and wells in concert with the way that plan is designed. The dewatering permit, which lets us remove water before it gets to the turbine building on the west side, was approved by the DEC for us, and we have commenced dewatering. We've actually upped that rate from about 15,000 gallons a day to about 30,000 gallons a day into 2 large frac tanks. We've had sampled those about every 10,000 gallons, and then we discharge those over. We've had no hits on any of that water. It's clean groundwater before it gets to the structures. So we continue to do the split sampling with the contracted services for A&R, ATC, and the most recent collection was just a couple of weeks ago. We continue to have good correlation with the data. And I mentioned the bi-weekly calls. Next slide, please. So we talked about the large condensate storage tank. We have some large, tall, not very big radio towers. They're targets of opportunity. They'll be easy to remove. They're mostly standing in fields all by themselves. We talked about the admin building coming down. We also have a spare turbine generator rotor set in a small outbuilding, which is near the 345 yard. Likely look at go ahead and downsizing those so we can get them into rail cars and ship those out here as well. It's kind of fill work when we have the right resources here, so we don't have to remobilize or demobilize them. We'll keep them busy. We're kind of saving that for the right moment. Again, miscellaneous remaining exterior structures, a lot of the security fencing, a lot of the security legacy equipment is being removed, and the redundant fencing, which is no longer required. We continue to prep for what we call cold and dark, and that's to kill all the power to the structures and allow the large machines to really step in and do the work in an efficient manner. Next slide, please. So, as I mentioned before, and we try to always close with it, You can see the laydown location prior to loading out the materials in the rail cars. We try to keep things organized and our people safe and operating smoothly. And hopefully that photo demonstrates our commitment to that. I look forward to continuing the good work. I'll pause for any questions. I think I even stayed on time budget.
Thank you, Corey. I think what we'll do instead, if panelists and members of the public can hold their questions, we'll go through the state agency updates, and then we can have panel question and answer on both the NorthStar and state agency reports. And with that, we'll just turn right to the Department of Public Service to begin with their report on the status update of NorthStar.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Eric Guzman. I'm a staff attorney with the Department of Public Service in the Public Advocacy Division. I'm here to provide a brief update on the monthly reporting since the last committee meeting in April, as well as provide a brief update on the annual reporting document submitted to the department, and that was pursuant to the Memorandum of Understanding in Docket 8880. Joining me on the call is Nicholas Kapik from 4 Points Group. 4 Points Group serves as the department's financial and technical consultant for oversight of the decommissioning of Vermont Yankee. And Tony, if you can go to the next slide, please. So just a overview of the department's role for anyone who is new to the meetings. The department's oversight role is twofold. The department first receives monthly and annual financial reporting documents. This is to assess the viability and financial assurances under the MOU, as well as determine the financial performance of the project overall. The department also confirms the technical work conducted by NorthStar to ensure that it's consistent with the monthly status reports that we receive, as well as any withdrawals on the Site Restoration Trust and the Nuclear Decommissioning Trust. Additionally, the department also engages in monthly meetings with NorthStar to follow up on any reporting information and address any follow-up questions. We also meet with the Agency of Natural Resources to discuss decommissioning progress. And Tony, if you can go to the next slide. So a site visit was conducted in early April by our consultant, as well as recently as the end of May, where our consultant observed the on-site work activity for the Vermont Yankee site. On both visits, the progress and conditions observed were consistent with the project progress reported by NorthStar, contained in their February through May status reports. Additionally, the department's consultants have reviewed the monthly and annual financial reporting documents and concluded that the project appears to be on course to be completed with the available funding in place. And just to note here, there is a currently pending case where NGS WCS Group Holdings LLC petitioned for the indirect acquisition of a controlling interest in NorthStar Vermont Yankee, as well as NorthStar Nuclear Decommissioning Company back in November. This is the petitioner in GSWCS has requested that proceeding be stayed due to potential pending changes. So right now that is currently pending. All right, Tony, if you can go to the next slide. As far as the annual reporting requirements, NorthStar under the MOU and Docket 8880 is required to submit an annual public certification under Section 2H, as well as a financial disclosure, financial disclosures by March 31st of each year under Section 2I. The public certification is submitted to several state agencies, as well as it is published on the department's public report page. The financial disclosures under 2I are only submitted to the department, and those are confidentially designated under a protective agreement where our consultants as well as the department reviews those. Tony, if you can go to the next slide. So under the MOU 2H, NorthStar is required to produce a detailed description of all work completed pursuant to any corrective action plans. It's required to submit a schedule of remaining corrective actions and site restoration work. It's required to indicate the amount of funds available for site restoration and the amount of funds estimated required to complete that site restoration. All of this is included in the public report. Specifically, the Site Restoration Trust balance at the end of last year was approximately $62.5 million. And that balance as of the end of last month is approximately $60.3 million. And the amount of funds estimated to be required to complete that site restoration work is $18.135 million, as reported in the public certification. And next slide, please. I'm not showing the, oh, here it is. Sorry about that. Then the section 2I, the financial disclosures submitted to the department. NorthStar is required to submit audited financials for NorthStar Group Holdings and NorthStar Group Services for the preceding calendar year, as well as audited statements of the Nuclear Decommissioning Trust and Site Restoration Trust fund balances. Both of those were received by the department. NorthStar is also required to provide an updated pay item disbursement schedule and deal model, as well as a deal model variance analysis. And those were received by the department and reviewed by its consultants, and no issues were identified. Next slide, please, Tony. And then since the last meeting in April, there's only been technically one full reporting month. So I've included the current disbursements for the Nuclear Decommissioning Trust as well as the Site Restoration Trust. At the end of May, like I said before, the Site Restoration Trust was $60.3 million, and the nuclear decommissioning balance was at the end of last month was $330.3 million. All of these disbursements are for work that has already been completed by NorthStar. And next slide, Tony. And then finally, this last slide is just a list of the trust balances dating back to March. These are available with on the Department of Public Services public reporting page as well. And that concludes my presentation. I'll be available for any questions from the panel or the public, as well as Nicholas Kapik from 4 Points Group. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Appreciate it. From here, we'll turn to the Agency of Natural Resources, Waste Management Division.
Hey, hello, I'm Gerald Noyes from the Waste Management Division, and I've been working with Haley and Aldridge and NorthStar to oversee the non-nuclear site investigation and to determine if what non-nuclear wastes are on the site and might affect the remediation of the site or or require remediation. Next slide, please, Tony. We do this by reviewing NorthStar reports and submittals and site visits. Of course, due to the COVID, our site visits were somewhat reduced last year, but we had 2 weeks ago, we were on site again to look at the progress on the site, and they did have some groundwater sampling going on at that time, and with the with our consultant ATC doing split samples with NorthStar. So we do this oversight through regular communications with bi-weekly teleconferences, the NDCAP meeting. We also speak with hold meetings with the Public Service Department and 4 Points. When there are draft permits that are issued by the DEC, the draft permits are put out on our environmental notice board for public comments. And then, like I say, most recently we had a June 2 site visit. We've recently had 2 retirements from the agency project. Chuck Schwer, he also retired from NDCAP and has been replaced by Trish Coppolino, who's my supervisor. And then Steve Simos for the hazardous waste program has retired, and he will be replaced by Ann Burakovsky. And both of these people were able to visit the site on June 2 and see what's happening out there, and you really get familiar with the project. Next slide, please. As I said, we're sampling the groundwater, or Haley and Aldridge is sampling the groundwater as part of the memorandum of understanding, and to show that the groundwater has not been affected by non-nuclear contamination. The results continue. We just completed the next quarterly sample that was in June. The 2020 annual report was received, and I have not had a chance to review it completely. But so far, groundwater results basically are not showing large areas of contamination. Generally, if there are groundwater exceedances, they have been limited in nature near some of the previous identified areas of contaminations, things like fuel oil spills or leaks. PFOA are the firefighting foam, which contains the PFAS, that was used on a transformer fire a number of years ago, and there is some PFOA contamination of groundwater in that area, similar to the same kind of stuff that has been found at the Clarendon Rutland Airport for firefighting foam. But again, no area-wide groundwater contamination for non-radiological compounds. The split sampling that we've had done using ATC, the state contractor, has verified the results that are being submitted by Haley and Aldridge. Next slide, please. As Corey mentioned, there were some corrective action plans submitted, and those have been reviewed and approved and have gone through the public comment process. And those corrective action plans are generally going to be small jobs of digging up contaminated soil and hauling that off-site. And those were going to get scheduled as the demolition schedule allows that work to be done. Next slide, Tony. We continue to review the submittals, and that includes permit applications. Different programs of the ANR will have different permits. The wastewater program recently issued their groundwater discharge permit, and this is being used for the dewatering of the turbine building. That is the interception of clean groundwater before it gets into the turbine building, and that water is then pumped into tanks and tested prior to discharge. And that's, as Corey said previously, nothing's been found in that water, but it is now not water that's getting into the turbine building basement and potentially becoming contaminated by that. Due to the COVID, we have not been able to complete a review yet of the risk assessment that was submitted by, or the risk assessment that was submitted by Haley and Aldrich, but we're hoping that once the COVID work has been reduced, for the Department of Health, that their risk assessor will become available to help us on this. And then we also, in the last quarter, we approved Haley and Aldrich's post-demolition sampling plan, and this is the plan that basically details how soil and potentially groundwater samples, well, it's going to be soil samples, will be collected from under buildings after they've been demolished. Because of even though some of the buildings have been demolished, they have generally not taken up the first floor cement slabs in the parking lots, just because those are good working surfaces for the heavy equipment. So, but as the demolition on the site proceeds, those slabs will be taken up and the soil will be sampled. Next slide, please. We have the ongoing work continues. I think the asbestos abatement is largely complete because building equipment has been removed, interiors have been removed. ATC was on site to verify some of the abatement procedures and the abatement and the asbestos assessments, and it did not find any significant anomalies. This past quarter, there were no asbestos jobs reported. You'd have to ask Corey to find out if there's any more asbestos on the building or not. But if there is, we certainly ATC would be available to work with Haley and Aldrich and the asbestos contractor. Again, pre-demolition building material characterization still is ongoing, and this is used to help determine where demolition debris is disposed of. If it's non-nuclear and does not need to go to Texas, then it can be disposed of in construction debris landfills. Next slide, please. We have our technical support contractor. They continue to provide evaluations of Haley and Aldrich submitted reports and work plans kind of on an as requested basis. They continue with the split sampling of the groundwaters, and when soil samples will be needed after the building slabs start being torn up and removed, and they sample what's under the buildings. ATC will be available to do that work. They'll also be available, as I said before, to do asbestos work as necessary. And in March, their contract was renewed again for a 2-year extension. So they'll be with us for another 2 years. And we've been quite satisfied with their work, and they are providing services, good services. And finally, last slide. We're basically going to continue doing what we have been doing, reviewing work plans, permits, disposal documents, sample results, corrective action plans, anything that is being submitted by Haley and Aldrich or Vermont Yankee NorthStar for the non-nuclear side of this demolition job. The support contractor will continue to be used for split samples and submittal reviews, and we'll continue with site visits and teleconferences to track progress. And that's basically all I have to report from the Department of Environmental Conservation.
Thank you, Gerald. Thank you.
Okay.
Getting maybe a little bit of feedback here. So at this point then, and thank you, Corey, Eric, and Gerald for his presentations, we'll move to panel question and answer period on those three presentations. Any panelists have any questions? Also, I'll just take this moment to welcome Lissa, who just joined us. Hi, Lissa.
Hi, everybody.
Emily, I have a point concerning NorthStar's presentation. Can you hear me?
Yes, Mara, we can hear you. Go ahead.
You can. I've gone back and forth with Corey about this. It concerns the amount of radioactivity that's in this greater than Class C waste, the material of the reactor itself, the core shroud around the reactor. I pointed out to Corey that NRC documents show that for a BWR reactor, the core shroud alone would be 6 million curies, and NorthStar records this as only 20,000 curies. So I saw an inconsistency here. It's true that the NRC's estimates involve a much larger reactor, twice as large as Vermont Yankee, but that doesn't explain 20,000 versus 6 million. And I'm concerned about this because of the finances. I'm concerned about it because of environmental concerns of Texas organizations, whether material will go into the landfill or whether it will go into a storage on site here at Vermont Yankee. So it's not clear to me why there is this inconsistency. So I asked Corey to provide the survey instrumentation and the methodology so I could take a look at that. And he said, yes, we could do that, but then I'd have to sign a non-disclosure agreement. And I didn't understand that because instruments, methodology, this just does not seem proprietary to me. So I'm going to raise this issue now with the NRC. I'm going to raise it with the Compact Commission and also with federal legislators. I just thought I'd lay that all out and maybe see if Corey has a response.
Corey, do you want to respond to that?
Sure, and I'll keep it brief. I've offered to have conversations with Marvin multiple times, at least 5 times. Cannot get him to give me a phone call. The data he's citing is over 40 years old, and it was an estimate. It's not updated nor accurate. We've actually involved the state nuclear engineer and the NRC resident inspector as well, and provided Marvin far more accurate and up-to-date information regarding characterization of the boiling water reactor type vessel components. And for correction, what we explained to Marvin was there's approximately 175,000 curies of activity in the greater than Class C material that we will have and ultimately store on the ISPSI. But as far as satisfying Marvin's misconceptions with the differences between the reactor types, I'm actually going to have to let him pursue his efforts with the regulator because I don't think there's anything else we can do to help him. And I'll leave it open to Tony if he wants to add to that. I know he's been part of the conversation as well.
Yeah, at this point, all I'll add is I'm trying to remain as neutral as possible with this simply because that's what my position requires.
Understood and appreciated, Tony. If there's any, just trying to focus on in the interest of time for this meeting and the public who are here, if there's any other questions, Marvin, maybe about the content of the presentations this evening, and then if there is this disconnect and there needs to be like maybe a reconciliation of the information, or you're still not satisfied with the inconsistency, we can bring that up at a later date if that continues to be an issue. Does that sound good, Marvin, or do you have any other follow-up questions?
No, I need to do a little more research myself as to the finances and also look at, if Corey won't provide this information, then I will have to find it out myself. I asked for the methodology, I asked for the instrumentation. I'd appreciate it if he gave it to me, but it's not something we can decide tonight.
Any other panel questions?
Yeah, Bob Leach here. Are you still sampling the wells on the east side of the buildings, between the buildings and the river?
Bob, I'll assume the question is directed towards me. Yes, we are continuing to sample in accordance with the plan as described early in the presentation, with some reductions for areas that we've had repeat zero findings for an extended period of sampling frequencies. But yes, we continue to look everywhere down gradient of the facility.
Okay, one other thing, I just want to thank you for the comment about the clean operation of the plant. I think I'm one of the few ex-employees that are on the panel now. Thank you.
Bill Irwin, you have your hand raised?
Yes, thank you, Emily. I wanted to ask, and I have to apologize, I don't have a lot of bandwidth where I live. It may freeze up here. But during the NorthStar presentation, there was a statement that the reactor vessel segmentation process has run long in accordance to comparison to the original plans. And I wanted to ask if the Department of Public Safety has found that, like NorthStar, they thought that that was not impacting the overall schedule, and that likely would not lead to any sort of financial or other adverse impacts.
Hi, Bill. Yes. So yes, we agree that yes, the reactor segmentation has slid behind schedule. The overall impact of that particular part of the project has not raised any issues as far as overall completion of the project itself. As far as any financial impact, we have not identified anything. And Nick could, if you have anything to add to that, just to allow. But
sure, Eric. Let me just add, that's something we expected from the beginning and have been continuing to watch. We will watch the rest of the reactor building to make sure it doesn't become critical path. NorthStar has been working on a lot of the tasks from the back end of the project. Excuse me. So there is a lot of room at this point. You know, we're not concerned about the project finishing on time, but it is something we continue to look at.
Thank you. I appreciate the answers to those questions.
Lisa?
Hi. I had a question for Marvin and Corey, and that was, isn't it true that the NRC is considering a rule change in terms of the allowable amount of radiation allowed at above ground sites. Is that, I'm just trying to figure out like why this is of interest right now, Marvin or Corey. I think I understand that that's the case, but I'm not sure. Thank you. I guess if neither of you know, I'll research it on my own.
I believe Marvin is speaking, but he's on mute.
Marvin?
Yes, Marvin, you're muted.
That better? Oh, it is. Yes is the answer. The NRC is considering whether some of these greater than Class C materials can go into near surface burial versus in a repository deep underground. And that's why the issue of 20,000 versus 6 million is an important issue. It's whether material has to go into a cask that goes into a repository or whether it can go above ground, not above ground, near surface burial in Texas.
Thank you.
Any other panel questions? And last call. If not, we'll move to, oh, Alyssa, is that a fresh hand? Or another question? Or is that a stale hand?
Stale.
Stale hand. Not, then we'll move on to members of the public. Questions and answers for either Corey Daniels or Gerald or Eric Guzman. Is that true that we have no public comments or questions on the NorthStar state reports?
Just a reminder to folks, you may be on mute. If you are calling in to unmute yourself, you need to hit *6 on your phone.
This is Ann Darling. I just wanted to know what AOC stands for. In the report there. Yeah.
And that is an area of concern. It's one of the identified locations on the site where we could have a non-radiological contaminant.
Okay. That was my guess, just from the context. And just in general comment, you all throw around a lot of acronyms, and it's always easy for the public to follow if you could at least spell them out at least once the first time you use them. Thanks.
Okay. I will try to remember that on my next presentation.
Thank you.
It's a good reminder for all of us. Thank you, Anne.
Hello.
Yeah, if there's someone on the phone, we just heard a hello, so go ahead.
Yes, this is John Tuthill calling. I'm from Ackworth, New Hampshire. I just wanted to get some clarification. In the state's report, there was mention of either PFOS or PFOA in wells, and I didn't catch exactly what that was about. And if there's any reporting data available, I'd be interested in knowing a source.
Okay, this is Gerald Noyes. This is the source is presumed to be firefighting foam. There was I think a transformer fire a number of years ago in the 90s. That's the only known potential source, and the groundwater levels are at or below groundwater drinking water standards. So it really quite a limited amount. And again, it's not an area wide, all of the monitor wells by any means. It's in the monitor wells that are nearest to the transformer. Well, nearest to the transformer fire.
Okay, thank you. That's good. I have a follow-up question, if I might.
Sure, go ahead.
I have been interested in material that has been deemed non-radiological, which is going off-site for either processing or disposal. I think it was mentioned tonight that this waste stream might be treated as what's called CDD, or construction and demolition debris. I know in past years, regulators at the federal level have looked at reclassifying what is considered to be below regulatory concern. And I wondered if there are results of testing of these materials before they are sent off-site, and whether or not their disposal location is being recorded. For example, with asbestos, that has to go into designated areas at disposal facilities and is then recorded for posterity. Is that sort of thing going on with these materials that have been deemed non-radiological, and do we have a sense of what the levels of radioactivity may be with these with this CDD? Thank you.
So I can take that unless Gerald wants to speak to it first.
You go first, Corey.
So the short answer is yes to all of the above. Now, the individual waste cells at different landfills, I don't know that exact data off the top of my head, but the manifesting and tracking of all this material and the dispositioning of where it goes is all carefully recorded as part of the decommissioning, and those records are kept for quite some time in accordance with NRC rules and the agreement we have with the state.
Gerald, did you have anything to add to that?
No, I don't. I mean, if it's solid waste, basically. If it's not radioactive, and it's solid waste and gets disposed of according to solid waste rules. Asbestos can be disposed of as solid waste. It has to go to particular landfills. It's manifested the same with anything else, like a pressure treated lumber or building materials that might have lead-based paint on it. There are particular rules, but it can go to, the asbestos would go to particular facilities, but the other materials can go to what are called construction debris landfills. So the drywall that's in the offices, that kind of thing. Just the plain concrete and brick rubble. Those can be disposed of as construction debris.
Okay, thank you. And Lissa, I see your hand raised. Is that another question?
Just to follow up on the previous, is anyone aware of the timeline on that NRC decision regarding the raising of the limit of Class C waste? Because, I mean, it's hanging around because there's NorthStar's waiting for that decision, right? So I'm just curious, when I know there's been a public comment period, but is anybody aware of when that deadline is? Just a question.
So NRC decision making and rulemaking is very difficult to predict. We follow it as close as we can, but there's a lot of cooks in the kitchen for the final rulemaking. What I will tell you is It has no bearing on our plan. We're using the current rules that are in place, and this conversation about potentially depositioning large amounts of greater than Class C waste in a low-level landfill will have the correct materials in the one canister and stored on the ActivitiesPanel long before I believe that rulemaking will come into play, and we would have an opportunity to disposition it. So it really, as far as I understand it, with the decommissioning, has no bearing on our decision making or our financial planning or our plans to manage that waste. And if I learn of anything that changes that, I'll share it with this group and the members of the public so they understand it to the best of my ability.
That's great, Corey. Thank you. That's very informative, important information. Thanks.
Bob Leach, you also have your hand up?
Yeah, just a little clarification on that fire on the transformers at Vermont Yankee. Having been there and fought at that fire, it occurred in mid-70s actually. I do not remember foam being used, but most of the fire was extinguished with dry powder and water. But that was almost 50 years ago. My memory could be a little shaky. Just thought you'd like to know.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I'll just add to that, the main transformer fire, there was more than one fire on a transformer for Vermont Yankee, and the one I think we're talking about with the main transformer happened in the late 90s or early 2000s. So while I very much appreciate Bob's history and tenure at the site and memory, we could be talking about two different events.
Well, if there are no more questions on the NorthStar state reports, hearing none, then we'll move on to early general public comment period for members of the public who are unable to stay until the end of this meeting. Any comments from the public? Hearing none, as we're getting through our business remarkably fast, unprecedentedly fast, I'd say. And we'll move on to the status of the Federal Nuclear Waste Policy Committee. Lissa, on this, I'll defer to you to head up the conversation. If you can.
The committee has been meeting monthly. We have another committee meeting next week. There's the webpage that's up. I didn't actually have time to really prepare a report for this meeting in time for this meeting about what's been happening. I'm actually away on vacation, thankfully. But we have committed to try to form some kind of a policy recommendation document by the end of this year, and we'll work toward that. We're looking forward to having Sarah Hoffman come. We were hoping she would be at this next meeting on Monday, but we haven't heard from her. We had also reached out to people at Deep Isolation, which is an alternative repository methodology that's being heavily promoted right now nationally. And my hope is that on Monday, we'll just continue the conversation and talk a little bit more about where we're at right now with the discussion and where we want to go. So unless there's any other questions or comments from panel members, I had committed at the last NDCAP meeting to create an ongoing document for these meetings that will update with input from other panel members, but there was not time to do that in this last period, but I will commit to do that for the next NDCAP meeting.
That'd be great, Lissa. And can you remind for folks and myself who Sarah Hoffman is and why you're interested in having her attend your policy meeting?
Yes, She's a former commissioner, on the Public Utilities Commissioner in the state of Vermont, but for many years she was with VSNAP and the predecessor organizations that the state had around Vermont Yankee, and also was the chair of the Spent Fuel Collaborative, which evolved into the Nuclear Waste Strategy Coalition, which the state had previously been part of, which does advocate for federal changes, including completion of the Yucca assessment and other points that have become controversial over time to some people. The state of Vermont had agreed to pull out of the commission once Commissioner Hoffman left as its chair at our last meeting. So Sarah Hoffman has been an advocate of certain priorities with federal management of different kinds of nuclear waste, civilian nuclear waste, and I think it would be very instructive for us to hear her point of view.
And then just a follow-up question too, if that's okay. The as you're getting speakers and guests into your meetings, you mentioned Sarah Hoffman and maybe somebody from Deep Isolation. Can you help us understand what sort of expertise are you trying to get at these meetings, if any? Are you just looking for a diverse range of voices? Is there specific information that you're looking for at this point? Help the panel kind of understand where you are in your process and what kind of information you're looking for.
Well, the question of whether or not our panel and our state at large should be supporting interim consolidated storage and changes that would allow that to occur out in Texas and New Mexico is a central question, because we had a formal position on it and now we don't have a position. And some plants and communities, host communities, have been advocated for federal changes that would, they think, expedite the removal of nuclear waste from their communities to an interim facility. So we're exploring all of the ramifications that would have for our host community, and talking about the different federal legislation that's happening, and also changes at DOE, and how the Biden administration is going to approach this intractable decades-long problem of not having a real policy, and everyone's frustrated. So the committee was trying to really decide whether we should really be supporting changes in laws, changes in regulations that would allow for consolidated interim storage. And then we've been looking at the permanent repository of Yucca Mountain, which really seems to everyone at this point as though it would likely never happen. So there's, we've been looking at Yucca. We heard from Mark Holt from the Congressional Research Service last week, on last month's committee meeting, and he went over the different, federal initiatives over time and where they're at now, and gave us an incredibly informative perspective on the issue. So, and of course, it's a difficult, challenging issue, but I think, we're chipping away at it little by little, and hopefully we can have some kind of, as I said, agreed upon recommendation for the panel to potentially adopt at some point before the end of the year. Or not. And that will depend on our progress. So I always like to hear Corey's point of view. I mean, I know Corey's been in this so long, and it's really, everybody loses right now with having no real policy. Eventually, we're just going to have to bite the bullet and all come together on this. Or we can't have nuclear power at all because we don't have a solution to nuclear waste. So it's in everyone's interest, and I'm always interested in hearing, Corey's perspective on where it's at too. So I would encourage him to maybe say something. Corey?
Well, you hit it on the head, right? Ultimately, all this storage in these storage casks is very robust and safe for a long time. It's wasteful. It costs a good amount of dollars. And we need a solution for all the reasons you just described. And it is kind of sad to see what I believe is potentially a bridging technology that's proven safe and effective that could really help us with the world climate crisis be stagnated and challenged in our country, where we should be a leader in this technology and industry. We're continuing to develop small modular reactors and other activities, but we're still not solving this circular waste economy component of it. And we're late to the game, and we need to figure it out. And I hope if we can do it, the world will lead us somewhere where there's a good solution. So I'm glad we're continuing to look closely at all the options that are being explored. And we'll get a report together, we'll help listen, and we'll get something to the panel that they can digest.
One thing I would say that we're also really looking into is this issue of community compensation, because if the waste does remain for long periods of time in Vernon or at any host community, and they're growing, the numbers of these communities, so the pressure for change is building. But if these host communities can get some form of compensation, such as laid out in many of these different legislative initiatives, including ones backed by Congressman Welch and our two very influential senators, it's just it's a moment that we might be able to have some real influence as a state, frankly. I don't know. Anyway, I guess that's all I would say is what I was going to say. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. Communities like Vernon that have had a sort of a tax deal directly with NorthStar about taxing the ISFSI are going to run out in 2022. Meanwhile, states like New York and communities are passing their own laws that would allow communities to tax the ISFSI to get some form of compensation back for having the waste there after all. And the companies in turn, like NorthStar, are accepting this and then going to the judgment fund to sue the federal government so it's sort of a backhand way to get federal compensation to communities through these taxes. And we are examining that because, of course, that's if that needs to be legislated and or not. I mean, if these companies are already doing that, then that's another consideration in terms of this future of this waste in the short and long term. I apologize if I wasn't clear, but that if anybody has any questions.
Sarah, you had your hand raised.
Yeah, thanks. Lisa, I'm not sure if this is within the committee's purview, but I get some updates, and with regard to your question about essentially about the money and compensation to communities, I've been following some of the Department of Energy's budget requests for our next fiscal year, and there are some increases there, and I'm just wondering if NorthStar tracks this more closely, or whether the Department of Public Service tracks this stuff in relationship to Vermont, because some of this is about, or if it's of somebody that you would have and come and speak to the subcommittee, Lisa, because I noticed that there's significant money being requested for new development of advanced reactors, but missing from that request is compensation for host communities. So all that to say is that I'm wondering if there is an opportunity there within the budget process has commenced in DC to advocate in one way or another here. Not that, or at least to get information.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion, Sarah. Thank you. One of the speakers and some of the outreach we're doing, Tony and I really will be also to the Department of Energy. They came and addressed the panel once before, I believe, but now with the Biden administration, it's time to invite them to talk to us again, and even to address the full panel. So we can suss them out in committee that way, and see how valuable it would be to have them, talk about that. There are ways, other compensations coming in, as you know, through economic development monies that that are channeling through commerce, I think. But those are more, that's a different thing. But that's a great suggestion.
Yeah, I can share that. I just the panel might be aware that this is the budget season in DC, you know, and it's those conversations around budgets. It starts, the president recommends a budget, and then it starts in the House. And as folks have mentioned, we have some influential senators. So it's not too soon, I think, to find out a little bit more. So thanks. I mean, depending, you know, Emily as the chair, whether that's something that the subcommittee might consider vetting a little bit and bringing to the full committee to better understand where we're at, because it seems to me that if nationally we're investing in new technology, we still have the problem with the waste. And I think it'd be interesting to hear in the new administration what their thinking is on that.
That's a great point.
I mean, listen, is that something that, just while we're all kind of here and chatting with each other, is that something that you would imagine, and Sarah, kind of being explored a little bit in the policy committee and then leaving some space for it in a future panel? Or is this something that you think the panel might be ready for?
Yeah, I think we should probably explore it a little bit and then report back to you. But I do think ultimately it probably will be something that the whole panel will want to hear from DOE.
Do you have in your kind of plan for your future meetings? Do you have and do you think that that's possible? You have capacity for that?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. So we should be in touch then.
Okay.
Any other?
It's really, you know, critical right now, as Sarah says. I don't really know, but Sarah, we can have a separate conversation about this, just regarding, you know, what might be possible that way, before we talk to, you know, Welch's office or Leahy's office about it. Anyway, yeah, and of course the town of Vernon, I'm sure, is very active also in considering some of these things. I don't know if Maddie's on the line.
Maddie is on the line, but I also saw that June, you had your hand raised. Do you have something to offer this, or what, do you want to go to Maddie first and then come back?
No. Just to tie this off, I think I'm stating the obvious, but Sarah's question was whether the department tracks this or not, and the answer to that is no. And I think the better source of information for this is what Lisa already said, which is to go to the congressional delegations. If they don't track this is exactly what they would track, especially if they're getting constituent requests from a state representative. So that would be my counsel.
So Sarah, let's talk about maybe between the two of us having an approach, perhaps, to Welch's office first, and then anyway, we can talk about it.
Yes.
Any other members of the panel that are also on the policy committee that would like to share anything, any thoughts, reflections, or the Vernon perspective? Maddie, don't mean to put you on the spot.
That's okay. I think Vernon is well aware of the situation, and they will address it before the end of the tax agreement. I think you can be assured of that. And if you wish to go forward and talk to our representatives, please do so. But I think we're capable of negotiating this ourselves.
I would have assumed you are. I was just curious if you were already engaging in those conversations, and if so, you know, if you had any report back on, you know, if there were any conversations going on regarding particularly DOE money for the town of Vernon. That's what I was really asking, I guess. Have you heard of any movements from the town of Vernon to try to get DOE money recently? I mean,
no, I don't think so. I think, as I said,
the
town of Vernon will renegotiate their agreements before the end of this cycle. And I think we have other things that we are trying to take care of right at this moment. And if you wish, to go forward and speak to our representatives, have at it.
Great.
I think we're doing okay.
Okay. Well, we'll share the information that we get in any case. So.
Thank you.
Anything else? Any other discussion on committee activities before we move? Oh, Sarah, is that a new hand? Old hand. If not, then next on the agenda is a status report on the NDCAP legislation. And I believe that this is just to round out and loop back to our conversation that we had in April about H431, which I believe was signed by the governor earlier this month, which is great news for this panel. So I'll turn to Sarah and Laura, maybe, if I could, for an update on this.
Sure. I can't see if Laura is here, but she was here, and I'm not sure if she's still able to stay on the call. But yes, I'll just jump in and say H431 passed as Act 54, and okay, I thought I heard somebody, and it's the legislation becomes effective July 1st. And as folks might remember, there were components of this for people who are joining for the first time. It's this is the statute that created NDCAP, and there were some changes. Some of it was, changing the composition, adding a member from Vernon. But I think the piece that affects or might be of interest to the panel is that it enabled funds from NorthStar, $35,000, I believe it is, could come in to support the work of the panel. So, and with that said, it might be something that we might need to discuss at a future meeting about how those funds might be able to be used. But that's it. It's very good news.
Thank you, Sarah. Anybody have any panel any questions about that? Lissa, see you're off mute.
Yeah, I don't know why my raise hand function seems to have disappeared, but anyway, yeah, I would move that we should create a budget for the panel. I don't think one, it might not exist, right, June? I mean, public service has had this as part of their overall budget, but maybe Tony could start a document or something so that we could just get a grip on the annual cost and if there's anything missing and talk about it at the next meeting.
I think that's a good idea in principle, Lissa, but I think the group may want to take a more hands-on approach here. What we've done in the past is paid bills as they've come due for the basic logistics, and we have plenty of data on that. What we're talking about here is money for particular activities that have not been exercised by this panel, in my tenure at least, because we haven't had a budget. And it seems to me that that's something that the panel itself should direct, or at least inform. I don't know if that's maybe a subcommittee or something, a budget committee, and I don't want to layer a whole bunch of bureaucracy on top of this, but I really don't like the idea of the department framing up how this committee uses its newly acquired and hard-fought resources. They're there for you to use, and that's something you should direct, is my view. We're happy to provide admin support, but I don't think it should go beyond that, is my view, or I don't recommend that.
June, I was suggesting that we get an assessment of the costs thus far so that we have a sense of what's already being spent.
So I have provided that to the panel in the past and will be happy to provide that again because this was the basis, I think, of some of our conversations around why we asked for $35,000. So that shouldn't be hard to do to get you guys that, and Tony will follow up on that.
That would be great. Bob?
June just answered my question. I just wanted to make sure that Tony had ready access to that information.
Oh, yeah.
I know how to find it. I know who to talk to in the department, and
he knows where the bodies are buried.
Yeah. Yes. We have the information on the website that was presented back in January and February of last year. So it would be a question of just simply confirming those figures are correct, and then add the figures for the past year.
Which have to be minimal, I would think.
Yeah, as I would think so as well. We've had minimal billing from BCTV. We've had no costs whatsoever for sites, in the past 15 months. So yes,
Right, so
there would be very little additional.
And not to get ahead of you here, Emily, but this might be a nice segue into the conversation about remote meetings and the like, because that will have budgetary implications.
I agree. And I think that is a good segue. And I just want to linger on this moment just for a little bit longer to see if where we are in the conversation panel on how now we can use these resources and how we should. If panelists have any strong ideas at this moment about that and wanting to open up the conversation and share a little bit, or if this is something that we should probably just devote a little bit more time to, and we can maybe have an issues committee meeting in the meantime and pick it up in earnest in the September meeting. I want to get a pulse check and see process-wise what folks are thinking, if anything.
Not much. Come on, Les.
Well, Emily May, if no one else wants to speak, I just recall that the thought process with the ask for 35,000 came out of, there are some expenses that the Department of Public Service has been picking up, so those would need to be covered by this. But there was interest, whether we have special experts that need to come in whether they travel to come in and speak to the panel or things like that. But I think there are some base costs that we need to make sure that are there. But my understanding, and the commissioner can tell me if I'm wrong, but that it would not go to be paying for staff time from the department. That's my recollection.
That's mine too, Sarah. I'm June and you're Sarah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Well, we're here. So yeah,
the 35 grand should be put to good use. And the argument was never that the department's time, it was all in the math, but that was never the central argument. Right. The central argument was that if we wanted to do something beyond what we have been doing for those 4 years before, money was needed and the department didn't have bucks for that. But now we have this 35,000 and you guys should make good use of it.
Great. Thank you for that clarification, June. So
my vote would be the first thing you do is acquire a nice big screen that facilitates remote participation. So.
Well, that's actually, you took the thought right out of my head, because I was thinking that when we segue to this conversation about how we meet, I think, whether it's municipalities or the legislature or wherever, we're thinking about how we can pivot and to have a hybrid model of meeting. And I think that will be important for our meetings, so that people can participate but don't need to travel 2 hours to and from the meeting, since we have a number of people who have had to do that in the past. So anyway, I think it's an exciting opportunity for the panel to kind of do some of the things that I had heard that we'd want to do, and I look forward to digging into it a little bit more.
Well, if I may just take a point of personal privilege and just commend the panel for all that it did to get that legislation approved and the hard work that went into building the consensus behind that legislation. It's very inspiring to see the group come together that way and to assert itself in an effective way to secure those resources. And from the bottom of my heart, I thank you, because the strains on the department's budget have been alleviated over these last few years through a variety of interventions, and this was one of them. And I'm sad to say that the strains are now building again, but that's not for today. So congratulations on a job well done, everybody. And it just goes to show that when we are able to communicate robustly with each other and to stick to it, good things happen. So back to you, Emily.
I think that we should segue right into the next conversation, but I will say, panel members, let's think about this now. We do have these resources, and they are for our use to really honor our mission and what we're here and the work that we're supposed to do. So I think now is we should move towards how we want to work in the future, knowing that now this bill has passed and we do have these resources. And I think we're going to circle back to the conversation as ideas come up of how we want to spend it, what that process is going to look like. So with that segue, and I know, Sarah, you already introduced or some thoughts that you had around that. Do you want to elaborate a little bit more on that? I'm kind of putting you on the spot, and then I also want to acknowledge that there some different ideas now that COVID restrictions are lifted that some of us, I'm thinking about Bob here, and I don't think Bob's alone, who are really Zoom fatigued and know that this isn't always the best platform to be working together. So where is the panel at, and how are folks thinking about this, and what's the best way to move forward, or any thoughts or ideas? Sarah, go ahead.
Oh, sure. Well, I guess, I've been thinking a lot about this when I wear my legislative hat, because the committee that I serve on, the House Corrections and Institutions Committee, the State House is with the Capitol Complex, rather, is in our purview. And so we've been thinking a lot about how we come back. When we come back in January, and we've had the same feeling of Zoom fatigue, but also really that working in person, there's a real benefit to that. I think we've done really well here, considering the circumstances. But and the way the conversation. So what I might bring from that thinking is that the way we've been thinking about it, and it's still in process, have to say, but is that we know that some people are tuning in more, like the technology, the public has been able to tune in more, and there's been greater engagement. So we're looking at a hybrid model where, like, legislators will hope be able to come back in person, but that people can also join remotely. And so if there's a way for us to do that, I think that I really like the idea of us coming back in person, myself. And I think this technology is a little bit clunky, but also if we can find a hybrid model to do that. I recognize that in the State House, we have a whole IT department that is thinking this through and getting the technology in place. So if we were to go hybrid, I think we would need to think about how we would support. I don't think it's up to Tony to figure it all out on his own, but there'd have to be some resources. But I think it would be great to be back in person if we can.
Other panelists have any other thoughts or reactions? June?
I agree with Sarah 100%. And I don't think this isn't about reinventing the wheel. I think I may be wrong about this, but it may be as simple as using a certain kind of camera that's able to rotate to an individual speaker and streaming that. And so you can have a hybrid approach. Schools have been doing it all year. So we we just need to find a reliable source of information. And I certainly appreciate any offer you're making, Sarah, to help us, benefit from what the legislature is learning. And there's also, of course, our Agency of Digital Services that no doubt will be working on this as well. But I strongly recommend, beg that we have a remote option because the efficiency savings have been enormous for my agency, and the safety aspects of this, particularly in bad weather, are considerable. The expense as well, we've often had to have people stay overnight down there sooner than have them drive home. And the Secretary of State released a memo today with a comment, I think. He also mentioned this in public, that from the point of view of his office, online participation like this has actually made these meetings more accessible to the public. And that's a lesson I don't want to lose anytime soon, because that's certainly been my observation in participating in legislative hearings for the last year. However difficult at times it is to do this in an online manner. And last but not least, many of you may know that I also sit on the Climate Council for the state of Vermont, and we're very deeply engaged in the work of trying to hit on the strategies needed to curb our emissions for the sake of addressing climate change. And it just does not make sense to have so many people driving from so many parts of the state to participate in these meetings, though I will be the first to say, with all sincerity, that I much prefer seeing you all. It's just, there's no substitute. It's a well-known fact that 80% of communication is visual, and I suspect that it's really 60%, and another 40% is probably the vibes we pick up from each other. But it's not a perfect world, and I think in the end the greater good is achieved through the expanded participation through this hybrid option than trying to go completely back to in-person meetings. Those are my 2 cents.
Thank you, June. Tony?
Okay, you garbled a bit. You're recognizing me?
Oh, yes.
Okay. Yeah, all I wanted to add, just to remind people of a few things. First of all, very early on in this panel's existence, the panel agreed to offer remote access. So going back to 2014, it was either the second or third meeting ever of this panel. We started, we, meaning primarily I, offered some degree of remote access. Initially, it was through GoToWebinar. It was, admittedly, the access was very primitive. We mostly went with audio connection and did not attempt to do video. Or if we did video, it was literally me standing there with my state-issued cell phone trying to broadcast the meeting. But we've had, because of COVID-19, we've had to go to a greater demand on web access, and it's been a learning experience. The learning will not go away since we have the commitment to provide remote access. We'll continue to do so. It'll be just a question of, are we going to have 40 plus remote access participants, or will we go back to a model where most of the people attending the meeting will be someplace in person, probably in the Brattleboro area, with several people joining in. So we've been in a hybrid model. will be in the better hybrid model resulting from from this need for remote access for everyone. So with that in mind, the other things that we have to keep in mind is number one, Vermont open meeting law outside of COVID-19 conditions requires that there is a physical meeting space, even for meetings that are done primarily online. So I assume we're going to be going back to that. But I don't know, open meeting law may change. And I've just blanked on my second point. But it was Emily, if you can remember, this is what you and I were speaking about before the meeting started.
The physical space in the schools and their policy.
Yes. And one thing we, yes, and that was the point. For a hybrid model to really work, we do need a decent amount of internet bandwidth available. So the meeting spaces that we'll need to use are ones that have decent internet access. In the Brattleboro area right now, that's the schools. The multi-purpose rooms at Brattleboro Middle School, Brattleboro High School have excellent internet access. Some of the other spaces that we've used in the past simply will not fly unless they've gotten better internet access in the past year, 2 years since we've last used those facilities. So we'll partly be dependent upon what limitations are given to schools right now. At this point, and things will be changing, but the requirements for schools right now is that they are not currently allowed to let outside groups come in to have public meetings in their spaces. So I will expect that will change sometime in the fairly near future, but we don't know right now what that will change to. And if we have the restriction yet that schools are not allowed to let outside groups in, we may be stuck with this hybrid model where there is a small physical meeting space required for open meeting law, but the bulk of the meeting will still be online. So, for example, I know Bob Leach has had a number of problems joining in on the webcast the last two meetings. If we have a space such as a conference room at Wyndham Regional Commission or some other central space to the Brattleboro or Vernon area, those who absolutely need to be in the physical space can be there, but the bulk of us can still be online, depending on the internet speed capabilities of those spaces.
Thank you, Tony. We'll go to June and then Lissa.
This is likely an idle question for Corey Daniels, but does the company still have any facilities in the area that could lend themselves to being adapted to this, meaning good bandwidth and at least a nominal amount of space for a smaller subsection of this group to congregate? Did Corey leave us? Corey, are you ducking me? Ah, here he is. Hang on.
June, this is David Pearson. I see that Corey accidentally hung up on himself.
The sound of my voice made him run. I know.
Yeah.
I got him back. I'm back. My apologies.
Corey, how much of that did you hear?
I got all of it. Unfortunately, with the governor and house being returned to the town and everybody moving over into our public support building, we don't even have a conference room that can house a large majority of our staff anymore. So we really don't have that, nor the bandwidth from an internet standpoint that we used to. It's because the majority of the work doesn't require that. So my apologies, but it's not something we'd be able to support on site.
No apologies. It was an idle question, and I've chased it down, and so we know we need to think in a different direction. Thanks, Corey.
Lissa and then Bob.
Yeah, the Governor Hunt building, I believe, has facilities that are large enough. I don't know about the Wi-Fi access that it has there. That building no longer belongs to NorthStar, and I'm pretty sure that that might be available. I know the back half of that building was quite large and would be large enough for the meetings that we've had recently anyway.
I think Tony's making note of that. So.
Yes, I am. I think that's, I hate to put her on the spot, but Maddie, I don't know if you can weigh in at all on that right now. The Hunt House has been turned over to the town of Vernon.
Yeah, the Hunt House right now, I don't think is actually habitable. It doesn't have any heat in it and no air conditioning, and I think it would be very, very uncomfortable until some of that is remedied, probably through the season. But there's another suggestion. Perhaps I could talk to the town clerk and the select board in Vernon, because they have fiber in the town offices. And that might be a place where a few, not a great many, but at least a few could congregate for a, person-to-person meeting, and then use the facilities, the Wi-Fi and the fiber to actually connect with the rest of the participants.
Yeah, that'd be great. Well, I'm adding that to the options list of kind of solutions to explore. Lissa, you've had your hand up for a little while.
I just was curious. I was going to suggest potentially a show of hands of how many people feel it's important to gather in person. I mean, I like gathering in person, but I think if there is this remote option, that I think most of us will probably want to exercise it when push comes to shove. And I'm just curious to get a show of the folks who are on the phone right now of who want to have that option. Is that appropriate? How do we do that?
This is Bob Leach, and I hate it. I like the in-person meetings.
Okay.
You're real clear, Bob. I appreciate that. Emily, you could just do a straw poll here. It's a non-binding vote.
Yeah. So listen, but your question was who wants to meet in person?
Yeah, like who attends in-person meetings and feels it's important, because even if the state does mandate it, that those rules have been suspended, they may be revisited. I would almost assume they would be, that the state might no longer require that. I mean, we will see, but I don't think that's necessarily imminent, that decision either. So I just was curious how many people in the group would attend in person if it was happening. We know the state officials likely won't because of all the issues we've discussed, but maybe there is a value of the ones who are actually living here to meet and convene in Vernon, or I also was going to suggest the Governor Hunt House. I think it's a good place to be, but as Maddie suggests, how big is the town facility though? You want to make sure there's plenty of room.
Before we get too into the weeds on this discussion, because I think that we can talk about meeting place logistics and we might just not be there right now. I do want to kind of honor this question first. Can we all feel comfortable using the raise hand functions on Teams? So the question is that if we have a hybrid model of meeting where you can tune in either remotely or in person, how many of the panelists would attend in person, or would you attend in person? You can raise your hand. I'm gonna raise mine. Is that just me and Maddie? No. Okay, so me and Maddie, and then and Sarah. Oh, and Marvin. I see your hand, Marvin.
My hand is up. I don't know
Okay. I missed your hand. Okay, so you have. So that's. I don't know. I think that's probably half of us. It is the local folks, isn't it?
Yeah. Could I just make a comment, Emily?
Sure, please.
I mean, I think that this format is a little clunky for public participation. And what I feel like is actually kind of a strain is actually having the public engage with the panel and in this format. So I think a lot of the folks who would be attending in person could then also attend in person. So it could be the local panelists, if that's what this straw poll shows, and the folks making the presentations from the state agencies, which could be similar, like it could be on a big screen. But I just think that the engagement of the public is really an important aspect of this work. And I know we don't have a huge crowd tonight, but sometimes depending on the topic we have a good number of people. So, and they could still, it doesn't prohibit them from joining remotely either. But I've really felt that that's been the most strained part of the going online for this process.
Maddie and Bob, would you like to offer something?
I think it would be good to be able to meet, in person. And while I don't think that the area at the town office is huge, I think that there's a big enough area that would support the people who would be going to the meeting. And as I said, if we could connect then with the people from up north and from people who just wanted to participate in the meeting and listen to the proceedings, I think that could be managed. But I would have to speak with the select board about that because the town office has not been open.
Bob, any last words on this? No.
Sorry.
Zero.
Not really. I really don't like this Zoom stuff. It seems like every time I try to sign on, I'm in the wrong place, talking to no one. So I like to be in person. I like to see the people that are talking, and I like them to see me.
I agree with you, Bob. June.
I just wanted to make sure folks were aware that I had posted a link in the chat to the Secretary of State's memo that came out today giving guidance to municipalities about what the impact will be of lifting the state of emergency order on public meetings. And it expressly states that we will be obliged to have an in-person option. So Bob, you can be happy. And we need to find a suitable site for that. It also says that they encourage having a remote option as well, for the reason I gave earlier, that this seems to have really driven up participation. So we're having a very topical conversation, and it's good to know where people stand. And it might be worth your while to check this memo out yourself so that you can see what it says.
Yeah, I just opened it. This does look really helpful. Thank you for sharing, June. What I'm tempted to, well, given that, is this panel comfortable? Maybe I could, as chair and facilitator, take a lead on exploring some of these options that we had identified for where an in-person meeting can be, and then becoming more clear on what the timeline and what that transition would look like. Would this panel be comfortable having any sort of formal vote on that, or is sort of the direction where we're headed clear enough that we don't need to do that right now? Any thoughts?
I I'd be happy to offer some suggestions of spaces. We've heard some tonight, but I think we want to make sure it's a big enough space. I do think that schools, I don't think it's going to be it's going to be a big change. I don't think it'll be as restrictive, but schools now have better equipment. We just have to remember that because they've had to do this as well.
Lisa?
Since it looks like we are going to have to find a space, I'm wondering if this also figures into the budget, the need for someone to, whether it's the chair or a committee being formed that will create a budget for the expenditures of the panel. And that might mean also, Sarah, that, we don't have to use Microsoft Teams, right? I mean, because it's just not emanating from the Department of Public Service anymore. Is that right? But I just bring this up to say that, this consideration, Emily, is also tied into the budget clearly. And we hadn't really resolved that question previously. So I'm wondering if you could also kind of, as chair, commit to creating maybe a draft of a budget along with that could also, be done in time for the next meeting and in consultation, maybe one-on-one with other panel members.
Yeah. Yes, I was thinking the same thing. I think that at this point, I feels like this is a conversation. Like Tony, I think that you and I might have a chit chat about this afterwards. And I'm not really feeling like it was helpful to have a pulse on what panelists are thinking. And with that, I think that the charge has become more clear. And maybe we can present if there's something that we had to ask folks in the meantime, we can either have an issues committee meeting or just connect via email in a way that is in accord with open meeting law, and then talk about it on September 20th.
Via remote meeting.
Good.
Okay. And with that, unless there's any more discussion on this, that was our last topic. Otherwise, we're going to move to general public comments. Any more discussion? No. Okay. Then any other comments from the public? Hi, Anne.
Hi, everybody. I just wanted to let you know that I can't see the chat, and I've gone into my settings to try and fix that, but I can't see the chat. So I don't know if that's intentional. I have a couple.
I was just going to say it isn't, and I'm not sure what's going on with that, but I've seen that some people are losing the access to the chat, and this is something I will have to take up with ADS because I've seen it at other meetings that I've been to outside of this panel.
Yeah, okay, thanks. Yeah, I was nodding my head. I don't know if you all could see me because on Teams you can't really see people, but about how clunky this particular Teams is, and for larger groups, it's great for smaller groups. And I use it at my work, but this is very difficult to feel any sense of participation, and in terms of the $35,000, I wish you'd asked for more. I think you're selling yourself short because I really want to see a really strong public communication effort through social media and whatever to the public in the area. I happen to come every time, but other people don't even know this is happening, and they don't know enough to sometimes really understand what's being discussed. And I know more than the average person, but I a lot of it goes right over my head too. If you really want public involvement, that's what you have to do. And you have to invest some time and money. And there's groups in the area that will, like I'm part of some that can also, we've been doing outreach, we try. But they'd be good partners in outreach. We'd be certainly willing to be partners on that. I also, it's complete change of subject. I have to challenge something that Corey said a while back. We were talking about the Federal Waste Policy Committee about the nuclear power being a good bridge fuel to help get away from climate change. It's my understanding, if you take a look at the whole fuel chain of nuclear power, from mining, milling, refining, power production, and waste, that it's actually a net greenhouse gas emitter. And anything that pollutes at every step of the way really is not green and is not sustainable and should not be in the mix. We have much better alternatives. And yeah, so I had to say that. So I would, but anyway, I will be happy to work with people on outreach, and I'm actually retiring. I have 4 more days of full-time work, and I'm going to be retired. So, I'm on this. I'm not dropping this.
Well, congratulations on your retirement, Anne.
Thank you. It's interesting. So.
Anyone else from the public have a comment? Hearing none, then this meeting might be ready to adjourn, unless there are anything else from anyone.
Bob Leach here. I make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Okay, then this meeting is adjourned 14 minutes ahead of schedule, which I don't think has ever happened, even with the robust discussion that was at 8:16. Okay, thank you so much, everyone, for your attention and diligence in this conversation. There's a lot to be done in the meantime, but I'm sure there'll be some emails, and if not, I'll see you all again on September 20th for our next meeting. Take care, everybody.